We paid over $30,000 to get every version of Apple's new M1 Pro and M1 Max MacBooks. And now that we finally got our grubby paws on them, we can really put them through their paces. We're focusing on the 14-inch M1 Pro MacBook today, both the 814 core and the 1016 core models. Not only are we going to review and benchmark the all-new redesign from notch to bottom, we're going to answer all the questions Apple wouldn't. And the question of who our sponsor is. It's Crucial! Thanks to Crucial for sponsoring this video. Get more done with Crucial's P5 Plus NVMe SSD. With up to 6,600 megabytes per second sequential reads and a 5-year warranty, Crucial makes tech to last. Get yours today at the link below. As soon as you lay eyes on the new MacBooks, the flattened edges strike you in the same way older generation MacBooks did. This is in stark contrast to the 2016 pedigree of MacBooks that did everything in their power to hide their dimension by adding curves wherever possible, looking kind of like an envelope with something bulging out from it. This refreshed, flattened design philosophy just so happens to allow Apple to stuff more functionality into the new machines. It's almost like thin at any cost held them back. Imagine that. While the changes keep rolling back, we're looking at a new touch-barless keyboard with basically zero deck flex, and thankfully, they brought back the function keys. Personally, I'd still like to have the touch bar, maybe stick with half-height function keys and sneak it in there, just so long as I get function keys. Like, look how much faster it is to mute a Mac with function keys than with the touch bar. It's not even a contest. And there's no contest that MagSafe always has been, and always will be, the best charging method for an expensive laptop like a MacBook Pro. Not only is the new implementation much shallower, and thus less likely to hook your laptop off the desk, but it's capable of fast charging at up to 96 watts depending on which charger you end up with. What's more, the #1 complaint people had about MagSafe, that the cable frayed over time, I've had it happen, that's been largely addressed here, thanks not only to a much more supple braided cable, but also the fact that it's a detachable Type-C connector on the other end. Mind you, Apple is still charging $50 for a mere 6-foot replacement, but that's still cheaper and less wasteful than a new power adapter. Besides, you can always charge via Type-C if you want, you just won't get fast charging. But there's one thing here that has never been on any Apple notebook, or to my knowledge, any previous notebook: the notch. It looks a smidge larger than the notch on my iPhone 11 Pro Max, and inside is a single 1080p webcam. Apple's justification for the notch's size on iPhones is that they need the extra space to house Face ID sensors, and these laptops don't have Face ID. Maybe the TrueDepth sensors are too thick for the housing, maybe smaller sensors were expected to be available, but the silicon shortage delayed them. Why then did Apple not wait for the next generation? It just feels like they planned for it, realized at the last minute, crap, we can't make it work, and then thought, f it, ship it as it is. Mind you, the webcam in that notch is quite good, albeit marred with a skin smoothing algorithm that I can't find a way to turn off. It takes effect both in Photo Booth and QuickTime. Still, the image is otherwise quite sharp around the edges. With a little tweaking, I think it could actually be one of the better webcams integrated into a laptop. Certainly far better even now than Dell's. And how about that microphone array? Not too shabby if you ask me. The speakers though. Apple says they've got 4 counter-firing woofers and 2 tweeters. And quite frankly, it sounds so much better than anything else I've heard in a laptop that it's not even close. Sorry XPS 15, you sound like trash by comparison. Apple's definitely tuned to these speakers with a sweet spot in mind, and that sweet spot seems to be sitting at a desk. When you're in that sweet spot, the frequency response is at its best, and stereo imaging is almost like you've got widely separated speakers. I almost wish we had a binaural recording rig so I could show you. I can show you the display though. This is beautiful. It reminds me of a TV at home with its 2000 local dimming zones and 1600 nits peak brightness, just crammed into a much smaller form factor thanks to the mini LED backlight array that Apple calls XDR. The other big feature is the new 120Hz adaptive refresh rate ProMotion support that can go as low as 24Hz to save on battery life during an activity. Apple's way out ahead of Windows on this one, like way out, thanks to having first baked this into the iPad line several years ago. It's not quite 4K, but Apple has a history of not targeting specific resolutions, but rather specific pixel densities. And in that regard, it's close to 4K and definitely Retina from any reasonable distance, which is really all that matters day to day. For professionals, a separate pixel-matched external display for critical viewing is common and can be hooked up via any one of the 3 DisplayPort-enabled Thunderbolt 4 ports, or the full-size HDMI 2.0 port, which can handle up to 4K 60 with HDR. HDMI 2.1 support for 120Hz would have been nice on a top-of-the-line laptop like this, but honestly, this wouldn't be too useful for non-gamers right now anyway, unless you're working with 8K for some reason. 4K 60 is the most you're going to get out of a typical projector or TV, so it's just not a huge limiter. Now, we don't have the M1 Max in for testing yet, but we can put the M1 Pro through its paces with some PC competition. A Surface Laptop Studio, an Asus Zephyrus G14, and if those fail, we've got our trusty GPU bench to show it what for. Starting with good old Cinebench, we've got our first impressive showing. Our 10-core MacBook Pro matches the Zephyrus's top-end Ryzen 9, and the 8-core stomps the Surface Laptop Studio and the MacBook Pro 13-inch as well. Geekbench brings more pain for Microsoft, and even the Zephyrus takes a beating from the 8-core M1 Pro this time around. Handbrake in software encoding brings more good news for Apple, with only our Ryzen desktop outperforming the 10-core and H.264, and the Zephyrus pulling a lead in the more complex and thread-hungry H.265 encoder. When we turn on hardware encoding, why is this MacBook so slow? Okay, it looks like Apple's Video Toolbox has some issues with the new media engine right now, so unfortunately these results are unusable. But I'm including them here because this is something you might run into if you pick one of these puppies up. Compressor gives us a better look at what the hardware encoding performance looks like, and strangely, it seems like whatever Apple did with the media engine to add ProRes support negatively affected H.265 in preference to H.264, which is a strange balance to make, but it's not a big difference either way, it's just weird. In Final Cut, both the new MacBooks put up numbers roughly double what the original M1 MacBook could, which is largely down to the additional GPU cores. And ProRes encoding is almost 3 times faster than M1 thanks to that new media engine that turned Apple's $2,000 Afterburner card into retro tech. Video's not everything people do with their Macs though, so let's come back around to 3D modeling with Blender. As of right now, Apple Silicon isn't natively supported by Blender, but Apple has joined the Blender Development Fund and provided patches to enable Metal going forward, so stay tuned for that. For now, CPU rendering performance isn't too shabby, with the 10-core M1 Pro beating out the Zephyrus in both the shorter BMW render and the sustained classroom render, which is ridiculously good. Adobe Creative Cloud mostly runs in Rosetta as well, and unfortunately that means that either Puget Bench will often crash, or in the case of the few available Apple Silicon versions of these apps, simply not work. We do have Photoshop numbers though, and these show very similar performance to the M1. Perhaps because of Rosetta, but also perhaps because of the lightly threaded nature of the work. What isn't lightly threaded is code compilation, and it's here that M1 Pro comes back to dominance. Even the 8-core M1 Pro outperforms the best mobile Ryzen chip on the market, and the 10-core is second only to the desktop Ryzen 9 5950X. It's ridiculously impressive when something like this happens, kind of like our new water bottles at LTTstore.com. You gotta see the new lids and colors, and you can get 50% off a lid if you bought one of the old ones. Now we need to talk games. I know. Games aren't a Mac thing. I disagree, but more importantly, they're a great way to visualize relative GPU horsepower. Unfortunately for us, I'm not aware of any game that takes advantage of Apple Silicon. The ones that I thought did merely run in Rosetta. As a result, turn times in Civilization 6, for example, are ludicrously long. A good 3 times longer than the Surface Laptop Studio and Zephyrus. This trend continues with CSGO, where it seems that despite having double the GPU cores, running in Rosetta is seriously hampering the M1 Pro's performance potential, although there is a marked improvement over the standard M1. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, meanwhile, does come close to the RTX 3050 Ti in our Surface Laptop Studio, and scales pretty linearly compared to the original M1. Temperature readings on the cores can get alarmingly high under sustained load, although those sensors are buried inside the SoC. If we look at the integrated GPU clusters on the same SoC, we see far more manageable temperatures, so these core temps are not likely to be a major cause of concern. Strangely, the fans never even got to max speed. I suppose I need to hit it with a combined CPU and GPU load to really get it to scream. Get subscribed, by the way, because we'll be comparing every chassis and SoC's full thermal characteristics throughout the rest of this series, and you don't want to miss that. This is just scratching the surface. The main hotspot is in the middle of the keyboard, where we read somewhere from 46 to 48 degrees on both models, while the palm rest area stays relatively cool in the low 30s. That's pretty similar across all the laptops we tested, if a bit warmer on the hotspot. Curiously, Apple has designed the cooling system so that hot air is exhausting directly onto the lower corners of the screen, where it's getting as hot as 50 degrees or more, which may be cause for concern over time. My recommendation to combat this is to manually set the fans to maximum if you're doing a sustained all-core load by using TG Pro or another utility that can manage the fan speeds. That should keep air flowing and prevent heat from concentrating in one small spot. Now we need to talk battery, and to do this we turned the 13-inch MacBook's display down to about a third brightness, and matched all the laptops up as best we could, fired up this YouTube countdown clock, and cut the power. Not only did the Zephyrus die hilariously quickly at just under 7 hours, but the Surface Laptop Studio also ended up dying a little early due to the GPU resetting partway in. Next to fall was the M1 MacBook Pro at just under 22.5 hours, and the lower end M1 Pro shortly after that. And the 1016? Well, it kept going past the 24-hour mark. Honestly, the only reason I can think of that the lower end M1 Pro didn't hit the same milestone was Horst was probably still logged in and I didn't notice. Ah, the joys of having to share. Still, to say this is luminary battery life would be underselling it, especially in light of the machine's capabilities. Like, the most comparable overall performer is the Zephyrus, and it got less than a third of that. I need to see this thing's battery for myself. Pulling it apart is the same process as with other recent Macs, but now just two screw types like my 2011 MacBook. Long in the back and short in the front, now with collars to prevent them from going too far. Pop two clips on the left and right, the panel slides right off. Now that is a pretty interior. And it shows more of what Apple's doing with that extra internal volume. Not only is there more battery capacity along with pull tabs for safer user servicing, but there's a reasonably robust cooling solution, and that battery no longer overlaps the logic board either. Amazing what you can do with a little more volume, huh? While we're under the hood, I should mention that Wi-Fi is limited to 2 spatial streams, so wireless AC, aka Wi-Fi 5, will top out at 866 megabits per second. This has been standard for MacBooks since 2019 and is one of the few design elements that Apple hasn't changed for the better. If I had to guess why not, these Macs use Broadcom Wi-Fi adapters, while the ones with 3x3 support were running on Murata chips that Apple co-designed and branded as Universal Scientific Industrial. Evidently, those proved to either be too costly, too unreliable, too power-hungry, or all of the above. If cost was a factor though, Apple sure hasn't spared any for the Thunderbolt, because each of the USB Type-C ports has its own Thunderbolt 4 controller. Apple's doing a lot right here. There's the return to an SD card slot, albeit without SD Express support, and we've got a high-impedance headphone jack that, while it doesn't sound amazing, is better able to drive higher-end headphones than previous gen Macs. What Apple hasn't gotten right is the handling of the notch. The mouse cursor going behind the notch and getting lost seems like such a colossal oversight next to the way that the rounded corners are handled on the display, and this behavior isn't even consistent if you've got menus open. What's more, the notch's whole reason for being, that is to provide a menu bar above the regular 16:10 display area that would otherwise just be bezel, is, by default, entirely removed if you use full screen mode. Like, Apple? Why? Thankfully, both of these issues can be worked around by either turning off this setting or by choosing Get Info on the app and checking Scale to Fit. The latter option, nobody should ever want to use this. The final issue I have is price. Starting at $2,000 US for the 14-inch model, it's not going to be for everybody, and as we've seen, the base model falls behind in a few fundamental ways. And of course, because the memory is part of the SoC and storage is soldered to the motherboard, not only does that make future repairs more expensive, you also need to order what you think you'll need by the time you replace the laptop, not what you think you'll need today. Personally, I wouldn't go lower than 32 gigabytes of memory to make a machine of this caliber last a while, particularly considering its unified memory that both the CPU and GPU need to share. I also wouldn't go higher than 2 terabytes of internal storage because you've got Thunderbolt for high-speed expansion if you need it. That puts my sweet spot recommendation at about $2,900 US, which is $200 more expensive than a similar configuration for the Surface Laptop Studio, and $1,000 more expensive than the 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro, albeit with double the memory. Is it $1,000 more worth it? You really need to look at what tasks you do daily to see how long it'll take to recoup that cost. But what Apple has here, what attracted me to my 2011 MacBook Pro in the first place, is a combination of power, form factor, build quality, display quality, versatility, and especially battery life that, while outclassed by less expensive machines in any one metric, is not even remotely matched in all. It's still early days for Apple Silicon in the grand scheme of things, and macOS isn't everyone's cup of tea, but you can't deny that Apple's got a good thing going here. And so does our sponsor, NordPass. Today's sponsor is NordPass. Security experts agree. Humans are the weakest link when it comes to security. Managing multiple complex passwords across all your apps and devices is a pain in the butt. It takes a bit of a leap for some, but it's hard to look back once you do get a password manager. Even before updating your passwords, you'll find relogging in from device to device a breeze. Setting up your new Mac, streaming at a buddy's house, online payments, and so much more. Now faster and encrypted on your device so only you have access. There are few things as universally agreed upon in cybersecurity than the need for a password manager. NordPass makes it simple to remove that vulnerability and brings tons of conveniences along the way. They're offering LTT fans a special Cyber Month discount of 70% off a 2-year plan plus an additional month for free. Go to nordpass.com/Linus and use code Linus to start making your logins safer and easier today. Thanks for watching, guys. Go check out our initial coverage of the 14-inch MacBook Pro announcement, where we made the decision to buy all these laptops in the first place. Kinda wanna take one home, play with. You've got enough of them coming in to cover for me, right? Yeah.
Stop thief!